Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show of Indications and Warnings on Monday, December 29. It is day 1405 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck and I are going to go right to the maps and bring some pretty interesting, important updates to you from Pokrovsk, from Kupiansk, and give you a news update from Huliopol, which has been in the news lately. Not a great chapter in Ukrainian military history from this little farming village just to the north of Orkiv, but we're going to take a look at what happened down there. Chuck, let's go to the maps here.
Let's go to the maps, absolutely. And I guess we're going first to Pokrovsk.
It is actually from today, December 29, 1845 UTC. And when I looked at this map, Chuck, completely took me by surprise that Ukraine has found a way to take territory back from the Russians, especially up in Rodinsky, this little community to the north of Myrnarod and Pokrovsk.
Yeah, and as Alan and I were just talking here, just before the show, we were talking about what happened in Kupiansk, and the same thing we were talking about, which was logistics and ground lines of communication and supply. You're seeing that here. We always use that example because this is the Russian tactic. You got a thumb coming in from the south, as we had in Bakhmut and Severodonetsk, every other city, and the fingers coming in from the north. Okay, again, 3 times is a pattern, right? 2 times, once is a miracle, 2 times is a trend, 3 times is a pattern. So what we have here, and you see in Rodinsky, the Ukrainians are actually pushing back against the Russians. There's a cluster of 3 contacts there on the fringes of Rodinsky, and there are the other contact points in Krasny Liman. And I looked and looked and looked at this, and if you zoom in very closely, you can see, in fact, the contour lines that I see on my topo maps, and I absolutely had to conclude that these were sequential contacts by Ukraine, right? So this fight started in Rodinsky, and these guys were driven back, and then contact continued into Krasny Liman. But to get back to the ground lines of communications that we're talking about, every bullet, bean, and Band-Aid that the Russians used in Rodinsky has to come from the bottom of the map all the way around there. And that is the exposure of their ground lines of communication and supply. And they have to pay the drone tax on the way in, Alan. And we know that's costing them anywhere between 50 and 90% of the product they're trying to ship.
Well, it also, I suppose it makes a lot of sense for the Ukrainians to pinpoint Rodinsky because it's pretty open territory there. This entire battlefield is under watch by drones 24 hours a day. And there is no place on this map that you cannot be discovered unless it's in a basement of a ruined building in Pokrovsk or Myrnarod. And even then, you can give away your position.
Yeah, absolutely. Any of the chimneys sticking out of a building. We have even seen heat sources visible through broken windows. And again, the higher the delta between the ambient temperature and 98.6, the more you stand out. You know, you go from green hot to yellow hot to purple hot. I mean, you're going to give them the whole spectrum to aim at. But, the other thing we're looking at here, since mid-November, Russia has been desperate to convince the world that they have Pokrovsk. And I know because every one of these Pokrovsk maps, I deal with 20 or 30 Russian trolls. They don't control the city. And this is one of those things where we get into really Newtonian physics. The longer Ukraine has not been moved out of Pokrovsk, frankly, the longer it's going to take to move them. You know, they have strong defensive positions. They have interlocking fields of fire, and the Russians are losing somewhere between 50% of the manpower they try to send to the front, never even gets there. So I'm putting this out now, and I'll stick my neck out. Absolutely. I don't see Покровск falling in the month of January. Not impossible that I could be wrong. Absolutely. But I don't see it happening.
Wow.
Wow. So I will happily eat that taco if we have to. But I'm just saying the weather is only getting worse. And, it's the Russian soldiers that have to trudge through the snow, not the Ukrainian soldiers. When they trudge through the snow, they're getting rotated. Even that morale boost, okay, I can walk 20 miles in the snow because I'm going to get a cheeseburger at the end of it, right? That's the motivation. Or I'm walking 20 miles to my certain death. You can see how those trips are framed differently psychologically.
Quite differently. It would be fitting also for Ukraine to keep Покровск contested throughout the month of January, because somewhere around the middle of January, Chuck, we're going to arrive at that date you brought to my attention. In January, Russia will have fought in Ukraine for as long as they fought in the Second World War against Nazi Germany. Now, after however many days it was over 1,400 days, they had reached Berlin. So here we are, 1,400 days, and they haven't yet taken Покровск.
That is absolutely it. And Покровск is definitely, look, it's not up there with Stalingrad yet, and it's not there yet with the Battle of Berlin, although I will say, because General Zhukov lost 1 million men between the Silo Heights and downtown Berlin. So that's the hit he was willing to take. But Покровск is coming into that top 10 league of casualty rates. Look, Russian casualties here, 1 in 5 soldiers, Russian soldiers who have fallen in Ukraine, are falling right in this map you're looking at. 250,000 casualties from Avdiivka, which is off to the right, to get to Покровск. 5 times what America lost in Vietnam in 10 years. This is one of those big battles within the last 100 years. Now, there are, the Somme, Bella Wood, et cetera, et cetera. This is at the lower end of that, but you can definitely speak of it in the same paragraph.
It might be at the lower end of that list today, but if they fight another 40 odd days for this place, which is virtually destroyed, by the way, Russian casualties are only going to increase. And it's also interesting when we think about Покровск. So the Russian casualties killed and wounded inflicted by Ukraine, a number we're never going to see because it would have to come from a Russian command. Well, the number of Russians who are unfit for duty because of cold, dehydration, disease, etc. Because the Russian soldier in Покровск, poorly housed, badly clothed, badly fed, badly outfitted, there are going to be some awfully sick soldiers that the Russian commanders are going to be sending into battle.
Well, there's another thing, military stewardship, you manage men and materiel to get the most out of them in a battle. These Russian soldiers are treated so badly. They're so badly fed. They're so badly supplied. They're so badly trained that their combat efficiency is abysmal, right? It's certainly much less than 50%. I personally put it about 20 to 15% of their combat potential is actualized here. Every one of the units, and I will do this periodically going forward, I've plotted as best as we can tell, and it's mostly a notional representation, but the Russian units that are arrayed here in the immediate Pokrovsk area, almost every one of those is at least less than 50% of its manpower. And many of them are at 20% or 10%, especially the more elite units. They get gobbled up first because they get stuffed into every tough part of the battlefield. And look, NATO says if you've lost 20% of your unit, you're defeated. Defeated, and you are pulled back. These Russian units, and we have seen this with the ever accursed 115th Brigade of Russian naval infantry, they got wiped out at Vuhledar. They've been reconstituted 3 times, right? So they kept the guide on maybe, but that's it. All their gear, everything, all their men gone.
And reconstituted with less well-trained soldiers, less skilled every single time they build that unit up from zero, basically, is what they're doing. So the Ukrainians had a very clear defensive plan in mind for Pokrovsk, and it becomes more clear as you look at map after map after map develop. The railway line and the M32, which essentially divide Pokrovsk into, north and south. What's special about this line? Because it hasn't changed in days and days and days.
Well, you've got, again, Russia is compelled to advance, right? That they've got, Putin doesn't want to hear anything except we've taken Pokrovsk. So the Russians are going to attack whether or not they develop the necessary preconditions for offensive action or not. What is developing the preconditions? Well, at the very least, you've got to reconnoiter the space. You've got to take into mind every advantage that your opponent has. What would that be? Well, they're in a 3-dimensional urban battle space. You can open page 1 of any tactical manual, and it's going to say you need at least 3-to-1 force superiority at the point of contact if you expect an offensive operation to use. But the big footnote and the exponent is what sort of terrain does your opponent occupy? And in addition to mountaintops, urban battle space is pretty much right up there with it. And so it's very costly for the Russians.
So Ukrainian forces must be occupying some of these rubblized buildings in the northern half of Pokrovsk. And this is, it's not that they are holding out there. They are preparing for counterattacks in this part of Pokrovsk. It's pretty remarkable to me that they're able to do that.
Right. And, another thing to get into everybody's mind is a lot of these Ukrainian towns were built sort of to a pattern. And Alan and I would say when we're sailing, staying in a frontline city, every apartment building was essentially the same, right? This was a socialist plan economy. Everybody got the same building, the same apartment, etc. But the other thing to think of is every one of these cities, and this was especially true in Mariupol, it was built to sustain a nuclear weapons strike. So there is much more underground infrastructure in a post-Soviet colonial city. So when you're looking at this map in the close-ups of Pokrovsk, every point of contact you see south of the M32, that means the Ukrainians came there. They're on the offensive. They penetrated that area, and so we get these points of contact. And, and again, we've got almost a sort of heat map here. If it's the darker the red it is, the more Russians are there, and the pinker it is, the less.
And the more wide open it is, it's anybody's territory. And I do especially like the zone of occasional contact. I mean, it's basically, being in a space where you don't know if the guy who comes around the corner is on your side or the other side.
Yeah, it's sort of like driving across a parking lot in a big mall, right? and you're looking because the cars can come from anywhere, and they do, right? So this is that same thing that's going on. The other thing I'd point to is information has evolved, and I can't confirm it, but it is correlated by the points of contact that Russia may be shifting the focus of its effort to minor hard, and that looks like that is probably happening. But if you look at the points of contact around minor hard, they're all on the exterior of the city, right? There have been fights in downtown, but you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points of contact. They're all on the fringes. That's Russia definitely trying to fight its way in, as opposed to contact south of the M32 in downtown Pokrovsk, and that is Ukraine bringing the fight to the Russians.
It would really make sense for the Russians to concentrate on Murderod, because it would give a little bit more coordination between the northern Russian forces and the southern Russian forces that have to coordinate their action to meet someplace behind Pokrovsk. Apparently, the Russians haven't figured out where that place is yet.
No, and the other thing is, to our Russian listening guests, you've exchanged one military operation in urban terrain, Maut operation, for another, likely an equivalent battle problem. So Monhard is not going to be any easier for you than Pokrovsk is. And as they're switching up these urban, objectives, I'll again point out, pull back to 100,000 feet from this map, and you're going to win the Battle of Pokrovsk by converging your forces at Heshrene or Vasilivka, right? The solution is in the northwest corner of this map. Russia can't do that anymore. And that, that was their bread and butter. So 1 million years ago in the Cold War, I was training up for one-way operations in Europe because the doctrine said the Russians are going to sweep everything before them. They're going to blow through Belgium, France. They're going to get all the way to the English Channel, and we're going to have to do the whole thing over again. That's a far cry from what this Russian army is able to do. And they're not able. They weren't able at Severodonetsk. They weren't able in Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and they're not able here to converge the way Patton and Omar Bradley did. They can't do that anymore, Alan.
Well, it's not on the 29 December map, but if we were to scroll back a few days, you will see those armored columns that the Russians organized to drive into Pokrovsk, and one to the east, one to the west. So one quite possibly being aimed at Minorod. They were utterly destroyed. So I would assume that Russia may have abandoned that kind of assault and returned to the tactic of infiltration, of penetration with very small squads. That I don't know, though.
No, you watch it as closely as I do. That's exactly what's going on. And let's put this in perspective. And it didn't occur to me till you just said it. They made one company-sized, 6 tanks, 20 IFVs in the east, and they made one sort of in the west. If that was their attempt at combined arms ground maneuver warfare, then it's even more pathetic that was it, right? It wasn't 4 brigade task groups operating in concert.
No.
Right? It was this pathetic, company minus size attack. And folks, the larger the tactical element they put together, the quicker it gets discovered and the quicker it comes to grief with higher casualty rates. It's this completely, it's hard to grasp, but we've seen it for the whole war.
Yeah. And by the way, it is cold in Pokrovsk. It's below freezing. It's snowing. There's snow in the forecast. It's not going to be a good spot on the zero line anytime soon. It is just going to be brutally cold, which is to the Russians' disadvantage, Chuck.
Yeah, whoever is moving has got to pay the freight, and it's simply that. It's that simple. You get to a little wrecked building, you've got a place to put your sleeping bag, and you wait for the bad guys. It's the Russians, and think of their logistics going to crap, right? It's cold walking a donkey when it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit and the wind's blowing at 30 miles an hour, and you've got to go 10 miles. You're attrited by the time you get there.
Yeah.
Right? We talk about 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter. Mm-hmm. That's it. At the end of 3 hours, we both live in New England, you could have no fingers and no toes after 3 hours in the right conditions there.
This is true. You need a warm kitchen and a hot mug of cocoa.
I'm all on that cocoa.
So much the same thing is happening in Kupiansk to the Russians than as what we see happening in Pokrovsk. The Russian inability to coordinate their forces. And the other thing that we're seeing actually in both Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, the result of outright Russian lies and dishonesty. So, generals are losing their jobs because they told the boss, we occupy Pokrovsk, we occupy Kupiansk, we've surrounded tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers in Kupiansk. None of that turned out to be true.
Well, even the Russians, the two majors, which are one of the more prominent Russian mill blogging sites, even they described this as the poorly executed psychological operation in Kupiansk. And the psychological operation they're referring to were the briefings that Putin was given. And that's, maybe I didn't make admiral, but I knew well enough, don't deceive your boss in the briefing, okay? That's not going to help your career blossom. And in fact, the general who was given Hero of Russia for the Kupiansk operation, he has disappeared, folks. Nobody really knows where he is right now. And I guess he's in the Lubyanka. Let's put on Find My iPhone and see if he's there.
There are a few Russian generals and colonels that you'd be able to find that way. One in particular I'd be very interested in finding, and that is General Surovikin, who was the mastermind or the architect practically of the Surovikin defensive line up in Donetsk and Luhansk. But he's not in Kupiansk. He's not in Pokrovsk. No one really knows where he is. He might be in Africa.
Yeah, so we're looking at Kupiansk, and I didn't put a map out today because it hadn't changed very much. However, I do have the latest contact reports. The latest map I have up will do very nicely. There are 3 points of contact listed in the last 24 hours, and they all conform to my estimation of Russian breakout attempts. And these are staged just from the map that we have up, which is the 27 December map, 2 very small pockets of surrounded Russians, one south of the H-26 and P-79 intersection, and one to the north of it. And these breakout attempts it looks to me like the Russians, makes perfect sense that they would be trying to extricate themselves from the urban area and move north. So if I had to guess what these contacts were, these were Russians trying to move. Hopefully they had the sense to try to do that at night, and they got smoked. I can't see a situation where a Russian tactical element that had been surrounded for 2 weeks would be in any position to fight its way out of a wet paper bag.
Yeah.
And especially, remember, whoever initiates contact usually wins.
Right.
So if you started it, and I would only start things when I had everything the way I wanted to. Otherwise, I'd let them go.
Yeah.
I wanted it over. I know this sounds ridiculous, but 30 seconds, I wanted it over.
Of course.
I wanted it done.
Yep. Well, the other thing when we look at this map from Kupiansk, there is no help on the way for any Russian soldier who wasn't able to get out of Kupiansk. Not that there were that many surrounded. It's maybe a number approaching 200, more likely about 140 or something like that. And they're, it's to their, it would make sense for them to surrender. What is the point at this point? They probably have run out of ammunition by now.
Well, and we're talking about less than a company, right? 100 guys. That's basically, it's 2 rifle platoons and a weapons platoon. It's about 90 guys. And you look at this map with the enemy order of battle. Look, there's a brigade. There's a brigade. There's a regiment. There's another regiment. There's a brigade. I'm going to keep naming brigade, regiment, and all they got left is 100 guys. Wow. And this was what we were talking about, Alan and I, before the show. This whole Battle of Kupiansk and Ukraine's retaking it happened because everything the Russians needed in Kupiansk had to come from the bottom right of this map to the top left. And external lines of communication that Alan knows well.
Yeah. And again, through open territory and in territory that's under 24-hour surveillance by drones. So it's a tough logistical problem you have here. The other thing that strikes me, Chuck, and you can tell it in a way by looking at this map and comparing it to a couple of maps on previous days, when the Russians decided to retreat, and we don't know if that was an order given by Russian command or if it was something forced onto Russia by Ukrainian troops. But clearly the Russian forces did not retreat in order, and they did not stay in touch with units. I mean, if you leave 140 or 200 guys behind in the middle of town, that tells you are out of contact with some probably key people, right?
Yeah, and I don't think a single order for a tactical withdrawal has been given by the Russians in this whole war. And there's a couple reasons why I say that. You really got to have your doo-doo in one sock. You're going to do a tactical withdrawal, and it's going to come like 1 rifle platoon here, one here. I'm going to, initiate it. I'm going to fall back 50 yards, stop, and I'm going to resume fire so you can do the same thing. Well, these untrained soldiers, the first time they get the order to fall back, they head for Moscow, right? And that breaks down. Here's the flat truth about this. 200 guys operating in concert with a plan had a chance to get out of that city. And now 100 guys, I don't know, they haven't been resupplied in 2 weeks. How many bullets do you think they have? I mean, they are in the squishy part of the doo-doo sandwich right now, and I don't think any of those guys are getting out.
Yeah, no, I don't think they are going to get out, and nor do I think Ukraine is going to waste a lot of soldiers getting them out. I mean, they're done for, and they'll just have to wait them out, basically. Speaking of tactical retreat, this actually is a maneuver that Ukraine has become expert at in various places on the battlefield. When we were just speaking about it here, and the fact that Russia probably has never, ever given that order for a tactical retreat. I mean, they were in disorderly retreat in both Kharkiv and Kherson when Ukrainian forces overran them. But look at how Ukraine has withdrawn when necessary, even withdrawn between Avdiivka and Pokrovsk, or withdrawn from Velika Novosilka comes to mind especially. It is a fighting withdrawal in which Ukraine inflicts greater and greater casualties on those pursuing Russian troops. Now, I get you don't win by retreating. I get that, but Ukraine is inflicting a lot of casualties in the course of these maneuvers, which are not easy.
Yeah, and here's another reason why I feel pretty right about this assessment. When do you withdraw on the battlefield? Right. Well, you withdraw because the tactical situation has changed to the extent that you run the risk of losing a disproportionate share of the men, manpower, material, whatever you've got. You break contact and fall back so you can live to fight another day. Well, what compels that? Well, manpower, equipment. Russian field grade officers, they could give a flying whatever about how many men they lose. So, you call up the company CP and say, look, I'm getting overrun. They go, tough luck, right? I don't know what they say, but we have intercepted radio traffic we've reported on in the past that, you hear these guys yelling and screaming. Help never comes for these guys.
Right.
These are literally the ants at the picnic. And they don't care if the first 100, 200, 300, 1,000 ants get wiped out. They just keep sending ants. And the good thing about this is, look, this is a big black eye for Putin.
Yeah.
He doesn't control Kupiansk. He says he does. He keeps saying it, but it just ain't true, Vlad.
Yeah. Now, you'd like to see Ukrainian forces keep the Russians on their back foot here, keep them running away from Kupiansk. There are some defensive lines that the Russians have built to the north and east of Kupiansk, and it would be great to see Ukraine push them that far back. So I think you'd be talking about another, I don't know, probably 10 kilometers for the Russians to retreat here, which would be great to see.
Yeah, but there's a couple things that I'm happy to take the victory lap for Alan here. He called it a long time ago. The northern ground line of communication for Russians into Kupiansk was always tenuous, always, and because it was look how exposed it is. The other thing that was always going in against the Russians, they never set foot in eastern Kupiansk. So even if they took the whole city, they still had this nest of Ukrainians astride their lines of communication and supply. So again, if you're looking for good news, is Russian field grade and general officers are utterly inept. They are military malpractitioners. They are pathetic, folks. And I am a naval officer criticizing their ground warfare skills, and I'm still right, okay?
Well, Chuck's maps are so good. If you love maps, you will love spending time with Chuck's maps, and you can learn a lot. One thing, they show the topography, the lay of the land, and which means zoom in on every single map that Chuck creates, and you're going to see a lot more than you're going to see on some other maps. Well, so it's good news from Kupiansk. I honestly think it's relatively good news from Pokrovsk, but there's this third place, Huliapol, and that's where we're going to go next. It's not good news from there. Ukrainian command was essentially taken by surprise, but not by a large number of Russian soldiers. It doesn't seem to me, Chuck. I mean, it's bad news, and it's a story we wish we didn't have to tell.
Yeah, so the initial word was, really bad. There was a breakthrough in the vicinity of Huliopol. The Russians were fond of calling it a city, and we're looking at a very detailed map here, and this is simply the village. You can see the scale on the bottom is, 2 kilometers, so you got a really, really good map of this area. The Russians got what we heard is the Russians have captured a battalion command post and have now taken possession of the city. And that initial claim, it kind of made a little sense to me. But I decided, look, let's go in and let's. No one else is doing this. ISW isn't doing it. Nobody does this. Let's get a street map of Juliopol. Let's look at all of the sources. Let's triangulate them, and let's take a look at what really happened. And look, is it good that the Russians capture a battalion command post where the computer screens are still on? No, that isn't good. But here's something that is good. Even though the Russians captured a battalion command post, they didn't defeat the battalion, right? So if you're looking at this 29 December map and you're looking at it, you can see the Russians, they control a little bit of the south and western part of the village. They don't control downtown. And I don't know exactly where the headquarters was, so I didn't plot it. But I'm thinking it's probably right where just above where the TO4, just to the west of where the TO4 meets the O Series highway. What is that? The 806-19. So right in there. So here's another thing. I'm a Russian company commander, and I say, boss, I'm standing here in the middle of their command post. Their coffee's still hot. Prepare me the Order of Lenin. And the next call is, I'm getting my ass kicked. We're back across the TO401, and we only captured a little stuff on the south end of the city. So, disaster? Well, disaster averted, right? So the Russians are now in possession of a lot of computers and electronics and frankly, some operational plans, communications plans, et cetera. None of that is good, but they didn't capture this village, Alan.
But how do you think Russian forces surprised this command post? I mean, we've been through command posts in frontline cities. They are well concealed. They really are hard to find. They are absolutely packed with stuff, and so much information pours into them. I don't know how commanders actually make decisions, but they do. But maybe the Russians just stumbled on it. They got lucky in Juliopol.
Well, there's one thing that will definitely happen if you take an enemy's command post, and that will be that the command element doesn't have an adequate tactical picture of what's going on around it. So there are a lot of times, in exercises, the SEALs would be sent in and we'd capture some command post. And that in exercise, I've probably done that dozens and dozens and dozens of times. So I can't say that was a big failure on behalf of the opposing forces I operated against, because I was a very small unit. I had very good intelligence. I had watched them a long time, and I was able to get in. But in this case, you have a fair-sized Russian attack, and those guys in the command post had no idea what was going on 4 blocks away. Then it was 2 blocks away. Then it was 1 building away. And then somebody looked up and said, holy shit, those are Russians. And they all pulled out. So there was a fundamental breakdown in control. And this was a territorial defense unit, which slightly analogous to National Guard, although they are frontline troops, Alan, and we spoke to many territorial defense unit guys.
Yeah. What do you feel the situation is here? Not as fraught as it was made out to be a couple of days ago with that Russian advance into Juliopol, but Kyiv is not far away. It was a year, 18 months ago. This was a pretty significant battle zone on the Zero line, and I remember you and I looked at Kyiv for a series of weeks, and I think it was in the summer.
Yeah, and I went into this. I got this map. I don't get these maps. I got to build them, and I started putting this together. And I kept looking at the contact reports, and I had to carefully figure out where to put the red zone. But the more I looked at it, the Ukrainians dodged a bullet. So they got a battalion task force, but in this area of operations, there are several battalions. And if to follow up on one of those attacks, if you know you've decapitated a unit, the second thing you need to know is where does that unit operate? So if it had the north side of the city, then I'd say push everything into the north side because I feel like the command echelon is taken out. These guys won't be as coordinated in their defense. But the map that everyone is looking at right here, look, that tells me the Russians were not able to capitalize. Look, they landed a staggering punch on their opponent, but the guy rope-a-doped them, and the 103rd is back under control. It is in the fight, and the Ukrainians could have easily been expected to lose all of this of Huliopol, which, by the way, this map scale is much different than the Pokrovsk map scale. So compared to Pokrovsk, this is just like this little tiny district, right? So, go back and look at the scale, folks, and those little black and white dots, those are 100 meters.
Yeah.
So this is a very detailed map, and the Russians and I would be telling a different story. If that dark red line was, all the way back halfway up the TO814, halfway to Zalachene, then I'd be singing a different song.
Yeah.
But, it is what it is. And to our Russian listening guests, be sure to get a hold of the guys who captured that command post because they were busy looting laptops and you missed an opportunity to take this town.
Well, that actually is probably exactly what happened. They got too busy looting and plundering and failed to take advantage of militarily.
Well,
Isn't that crazy how the Russians...
Well, here's the other thing. The intel guy gets in there, Russian intel, goes, give me all the computers. What computers? Look, if they steal your damn toilet, they are sure as hell going to steal that laptop, and they'll erase the hard drive, and whatever tactical intelligence, gold mine could have been gained from that.
Yeah.
Right. So this is what happens when you don't have soldiers, right? No one went in there and said, don't touch anything. We go in and take one of those command posts, and we're videotaping everything. Everything is, so you videotape everything so you know where it was. Now you're putting it in the drop sacks. And the other thing, SEALs can take anything, but we can't hold anything for more than 30 seconds. So we're in and we're out. These guys were infantry guys. They didn't set security on the target. They didn't start what we call special site exploitation, go through everything. Look, they're clowns.
Yeah.
They're clowns. We're still fighting the clown show. And, but Ukraine, you dodged a bullet. You got the luck of the Irish here.
Okay. I bet we'll be back in Huliopol and around Orkey after January 1st. I just have that feeling. Yeah, there was some major action on the high seas, Chuck. And it's really, again, another feather in someone's cap in the special services of Ukraine, and it occurred far afield in the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yeah, so we're talking about the MV Ursa Major, which is a merchant ship, although it is associated quite strongly with the Russian army. And Ursa Major was one of the stalwart ships supplying the Russian effort during the Syrian civil war. So just about a year ago, December 23rd in 2024, an explosion occurred contiguous to the machinery spaces in Ursa Major, which I will also say she was underway at the time. The explosions caused inward hull penetration, so we know that they were from an exterior source. If you ask a SEAL exterior source on a moving ship, we're going to say limpet mine, and that's what happened. And the ship went down with the only casualty that has ever occurred with a global campaign of Ukrainian special forces naval special forces against Russian shadow tankers. One guy went down with a ship, and he was actually missing. Okay, so we're about a year later, and none of this came out at the time, and I just did a special report for the Kyiv Post about all of these ships that have been attacked. But the Spanish authorities are now saying that Ursa Major was carrying 2 reactor vessels, right? Nuclear reactors. And you think about a reactor vessel, it is a very complex, glorified teapot in which you put fissile material and moderators, and that boils water. I have this question for the Spanish authorities. If this thing got sunk in several thousand meters of water, how do you know it had reactor vessels in it? And I would only suggest at this point, Alan, that these reactor vessels may have in fact been loaded, right? They may have in fact contained fissile material. We know that these were on the way to North Korea. And just one more supposition here. I think the United States would be very interested in preventing North Korea from adding 2 more nuclear reactors to its set of tyrant play toys. I can see a convergence of Ukrainian and American interests here, but I will just leave it at that.
And this happened a year ago, December 2024. Don't mistake my excitement when I introduced this story. So it strikes me, you're sending these reactor vessels via ship all the way around the world to reach North Korea. Why not put them on a special train and run across Russia, even to Vladivostok, where you can, if you're going to deliver it by ship, you can put it on a ship in Vladivostok and basically go around the corner to North Korea.
Yeah, it may be that these vessels were too big to do that, because we talked, getting ready for the show, that seemed like a logical way to send them. That probably size was a constraint. The other thing the Russians have to think about is there's a lot of service interruptions, let me put it that way, on the Russian rail system. And I'll remind everybody that 2 years ago, Ukraine blew up train cars in the Manchurian tunnel that links China with Russia in a single rail line tunnel. And so, I don't know. But certainly, another thing I'd like to ask, how does Spain know there are reactor vessels? Well, there are dozens, in fact, of sunk Russian nuclear submarines that went down. One I'm thinking about, the Cosmolets off the coast of Norway, where its reactors, crushed at depth, were still spewing radioactivity. So perhaps that is how Spain has come to the conclusion that reactors were aboard. But again, look how this information evolved. Nobody said anything about that. Even I wondered, what's so big about this ship, right? What's so big about her? Everyone assumed when she was interdicted a year ago, she was on her way to Syria to remove Russian force, material, put in, whatever. But this is a very, very interesting little occurrence. I think there'd be a great book in this.
Oh, there probably would be a great book in this, and this might just be one chapter if you focus on Ukraine's ability to strike almost anywhere in the high seas at this point. But what's really also interesting to me, Chuck, is that now a year later, that allows people to get a hold of the story of Ukraine's actions on the high seas against Russian vessels. This is a year ago. Ukraine wasn't experimenting with interdicting Russian ships on the high seas. They weren't practicing. They were doing it a year ago. So you can just imagine what Ukraine might have planned for the coming year.
Yeah, it's definitely going to go up. They have already hit 2 ships in the Mediterranean. They have hit, there have been a whole string of, let's call them industrial incidents in the Persian Gulf regarding the ships that were transporting, Russian-sourced oil. So there's I do have to say this. We've been talking about this for 3 years. The night that Ukraine took down 2 offshore platforms at the same time and captured the Nebo M radars and the electronic warfare, look, that put them up there at the absolute top rung, the NFL of naval special warfare. They're as good as anybody, and they were trained by the SAS, the SBS, all the premier naval special warfare operators.
Yeah.
And they're up there in the bigs now.
They sure are. And they'll be training other special services around the world, I would imagine. I mean, a lot of people want to know some details of Ukrainian operations, and eventually they will come out. Chuck and I are going to be paying close attention to what's happening in Pokrovsk and paying close attention to what's happening in Kupiansk. So you can be sure we'll be back with more maps, more of Chuck's analysis in particular, and more thoughts about breaking news. I don't think that Chuck and I are going to take time right now to talk about the so-called peace talks that occurred in Florida between the United States and Ukraine. Really, the highest level between Trump and Zelensky. But if you tune into the second part of our special show about our best estimate of how Ukraine is winning and what a Ukrainian military victory would look like and how does Ukraine get to it. If you turn into the second part of that show, chances are you'll hear us talk a little bit about the peace process.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it's going to go. It's interesting that the last thing Putin wants is to get into a room with Zelensky. And now I speak as a failed clinical psychologist. Even in Putin's rat brain, right? He's got a rat brain for a cerebral cortex and the lizard brain of a white shark. Even he knows he's wrong, right? Even he knows he started this war. Even he knows what evil his troops are up to, right? So, and look, Ukraine is Ukraine. I don't blame Ukraine for saying, hey, look, I didn't start this. Don't blame me that you put your hand into the sausage machine. We're not going to give you on the conference table what you can't earn on the battlefield.
Right.
But it's much more complex, and we'll hit that when we hit it.
It is much more complex than that. So until we are back, I don't know exactly when that will be, if we have one more show in 2025 or if we won't be back until 2026. But we will be here soon with maps and on every show. I'm thrilled always to be able to say, Chuck, Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. Thanks, folks, and we appreciate all the comments. Please, we'll try to get to as many of them as we can, and do us a favor while you're down there, bomb control for us. So thanks a lot.